your primary reason should not be to make a financial gain. The last 12 months have really suffered. There's a lot lower risk ways to make money. The primary reason they're investing is Hi, I'm Andy. I'm a researcher, creative, father of two, entrepreneur and investor in people. And a lot of the meaningful work that I do is through my business, the Angel Investing School. And I've been angel investing for the last 6 years.
So tell me a bit more about what you do when you're not being an angel investor. Do you have a full-time job? Are you self-employed? Do you own your own business?
So I own a business called the Angel Investing School, and that's where myself and 3 of my colleagues come together to really support founders of connecting with angel investors and making meaningful connections way before they want to raise any money. And we also help angel investors understand the fundamentals of what it means to invest into a startup, support them with your skills and expertise, and unlock value for both you and them. I also from time to time do things like keynote speaking, facilitating workshops, and really facilitating hard conversations between leaders. A lot of times around how to build an inclusive culture, how to create an environment where people can bring their difference, and actually how do you lead in these difficult markets, especially when it's so difficult to fundraise for so many founders.
So I'm curious, with all these experiences that you have, what made you want to become an angel investor? Is it something that you always wanted to do when you were growing up, or was there like a turning point where you realized, actually, this is what I want to do?
So my personal mission is always tied to kind of unlocking potential in people. And I realized that entrepreneurs can come from anywhere, but they don't all have access to opportunity. And one of the pivotal things that a lot of them lack is access to experienced entrepreneurs and experienced investors who can back them, support them, and enable them to build their businesses. So angel investors play this critical role where they form that first round of funding for an entrepreneur. But it's not just the money that entrepreneur gets, it's the confidence, it's the support and their self-esteem, it's the belief in the future and the vision that they have for what they're building. And it's their expertise to say, this is how you build that business model. Here's an introduction to a customer. Here's a potential partner. Here's the mistakes that I made on my journey that you don't have to make too. So there's so much more value that's unlocked for the entrepreneur, but also for the investor too, who loves having that front row seat in an entrepreneur building their business.
So tell me a bit more about like your childhood, growing up, your early influence. Were you like always entrepreneurial? Were you always interested in investing?
I think looking back, when I was a child, I was really fascinated in 3 things. One was sports and football. I was really good, hated playing in the cold, so I knew that I had to strike that off the list. The other was into technology. I used to walk around 25 to 30 minutes with my brother and a few friends to a technology park and kind of sneak in at night to play SNES emulator games on their computers, which is like Super Nintendo games on a PC. It showed looking back that I was willing to go to such a far extent to engage with technology because I loved it so much. And the third thing I was fascinated was with businesses and how they fit together. Like there's a marketing department and the sales and finance and procurement, and how does that all fit together as a platform for good? Because initially I just thought these people as CEOs and founders are scaling their ambition and they're using business, which is a collection of people, in order to do that. And that always fascinated me.
Tell me a bit more about your early career. Were there people that you met, you bumped into that were doing angel investing that sparked your interest?
So looking back, I had a pivotal trip to San Francisco, and I was working for a consultancy at the time. They were a startup. There was 25-ish people when I joined that business. There was about 300 when I left. And during that trip to San Francisco, I was charged with building a new business for them, a strategic outpost. How can we connect with venture capitalists out in the Bay and connect them to our corporate clients in the UK and in Africa? And it just so happened that those venture capitalists that we were forming connections with and working with were Andreessen Horowitz, Greylock Capital, Lightspeed Ventures, and Sequoia Capital. So these were premier VCs that I didn't know at the time, and ignorance is bliss, because it allowed me to have a front row seat to ask all the questions that I needed to understand how venture capital works and how they support entrepreneurs. And what I noticed when I was in those boardrooms was you look on the plaques on the wall and you'll see eBay and Google and YouTube and all of the companies that shape the internet that we have today. And I remember being at Lightspeed Ventures office and they were mentioning that 12 months before I was there, in the room opposite to me, there was a company being incubated called Snapchat. And of course, Snapchat has gone on to be a global phenomenon, but that is privy to the kind of access that I had to opportunity. And what I realized in that moment being out in San Francisco is venture capitalism and entrepreneurship is all about access. Can you access the right people to unlock your rounds, to unlock your value, to unlock your ambition? And it's the same true today. right? If a great VC supports an entrepreneur, it sends a signal to others to say, hey, this is an entrepreneur to watch. This may be one that you want to try and back too. So access is central to a lot of what I do. How can I democratize access to these spaces that I have access to?
In terms of like what motivated you then and what motivates you now to be an angel investor, is it still the same feeling, the same motivation, or has it changed over your journey?
So if I strip back the layers and I look back, like my parents migrated from Ghana to the UK. So they sacrificed the life that they knew for a life that was unknown. And in doing that, I had this privilege of being born in London, happened to be black, happened to be a man. But what I realized from a young age is that a lot of my family members back in Ghana had high potential just like me as a kid, but they had low access to opportunity. And just because I was born in London, I had such high access to opportunity. And there was a certain type of opportunity that I was really fascinated with, and it was social capital. My dad was a cab driver, so he used to tell me all of these relationships he had with his clients. Hey, there's Mr. Naymaster, who's a pharmacist. Hey, this other lady is Nigerian, she's a lawyer. This other person works in oil. So through the stories he would tell me, I was just really curious into this life outside of Tottenham, essentially. And then I eventually did a work experience with one of his clients who was an architect in Finchley. I remember the first day in going to that work experience, I saw a famous boxer, Frank Bruno, in the car park of a petrol station. I already felt like I was in Barcelona. I felt like I was in a brand new world. But that was an introduction into this new world of opportunity. If you know the right person and they feel you're a safe pair of hands and they believe in you, they can open a door to opportunity. And that's not to do with the institution that you went to, not to do for the brand that you worked for, not even to do necessarily the skills that you have. It can be just because you're a likable person and someone connected with something emotionally with you. And that's a power that you have in certain cities in the world where there's that social capital and that opportunity, such as London, such as San Francisco, such as New York. And I was just always fascinated with that, and I've just leaned right into that.
Sounds like you've had quite the journey and quite the experience. I really want to know, how did you stumble across your first angel investment? Did you know at the time that was angel investing? And was it a positive experience? Was it a negative experience? And how did you even meet the founder?
So I think all of us in life go through this journey of discovery, self-discovery, wandering in the wilderness, trying to figure ourselves out. And when I was at university, I was the president of the Entrepreneur Society. Did I really understand what that meant? Not really. But I was really curious and interested in this thing called entrepreneurship and building businesses. So I was leaning into my curiosity. When I took my first job in Ernst & Young as a management consultant, started saving a little bit of money, started to try and engage in entrepreneurship on my evenings and weekends, starting a business with my brothers called Mixtape Madness and a few friends. I loved entrepreneurship, I just didn't know how to really get into it. Then an opportunity came from a friend to invest in a startup based in Africa. And my heart took over instead of my head. I thought, this sounds great, this sounds amazing. And I ended up investing more money than I could afford to lose in an entrepreneur that I didn't really understand. Looking back at that pitch deck today, it was 2014, 2015, there was 100 red flags, 100 reasons why I shouldn't do it. I even emailed 2 friends of mine who are lawyers who told me not to invest in something I don't understand. Don't know why I emailed them because I ignored them anyway. But the truth is, I invested more money than I could afford to lose at that time and made a terrible mistake. And I think it's pivotal to the nature of entrepreneurs and their mindsets. You can see failure as a setup to step up, or failure could be that thing that shackles you and stops you from moving forward. And I think that's when it's truly a failure, when it shackles you and you can't move forward. But it's not a failure if it's a lesson learned. If it's something that I can take from that experience and say, you know what, I'm more intelligent moving forward based on what I experienced, that's a success. And I think that's the mindset of an entrepreneur, continuously learning, taking stock of what they're experiencing and thinking, how does that improve them and the environment that they provide for others to create value.
And do you feel like that first investment that you made, have you learned quite a few lessons from it?
I've learned so many lessons from that first investment that I decided to start a business based off those lessons. So now people can afford to learn the lessons that I learned at a far cheaper rate than I did, which was, thousands of pounds making a foolish investment, and they can learn more intelligently how to get started as an angel investor. What's their motivation for starting? What value do they have to give given their expertise? How do you find great entrepreneurs? How do you put your ego aside and support them at the level that they're at and meet them where they're at? How do you do your due diligence? How do you understand the legal process of investing into a startup? All this and more we walk people through, and I had to figure out the hard way through a lot of coffee conversations and mistakes that I made.
I'm actually curious, if you're comfortable with sharing, how many investments have you made to date so far?
I've made 17 investments to date.
And when was your most recent investment?
My most recent investment was late in 2023. It's a wellness brand. And it's really difficult actually because direct-to-consumer brands over the last 12 months have really suffered because it's been a difficult fundraising environment, because what's changed is that interest rates have gone up, which means the cost of capital has gone up, which means that instead of this very wealthy organization like a pension fund or a family office putting money into venture capital, they can just lend that money and earn good interest on it. So as a consequence, there's less money chasing as many deals still. So what happens is actually there's less money going into a lot of startups. And if you're a direct-to-consumer startup and you're not profitable, it seems unattractive for an investor when looking at that business. So that business has really found it challenging in terms of fundraising and sustaining the business. The businesses that I guess have the most power right now in this market are the ones that have optionality. You have optionality if you're profitable. Because if I'm profitable, I can choose to raise a round, can choose to get debt, I can tap into grant funding, I can choose to survive off the revenue that I've earned running my business. So that's the gold standard at the moment. Like if you can get to profitability, it gives you that optionality.
What tips would you give to anyone that actually wants to become an angel investor?
I think before you can invest in other people, you have to do that investment in yourself and understand and have that awareness as to what's my motivation? Why do I really want to do this? Is there a certain cause that I identify with like backing female founders or people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds? Is there certain industries that I have just an affiliation with, such as healthcare, because I worked as a doctor for the last 20 years? Like you've got to know yourself to really know how you can add value beyond the capital, right? You have to understand that motivation beyond the money, because no angel investor that I know who's a serious investor who I respect is doing it primarily for a financial return. No, that's what they have their businesses for. That's what they have their property investments for. It's not from their startup investments. And it's not to say that they don't want those startups to do well, but the prime reason they're investing is to meet fascinating people and unlock value along that journey and support them along those journeys. And I think that's really important to understand upfront so you can self-select and say whether this is for you or not. And it may not be a no, it just might be not right now. And that's okay. And I think we need to know ourselves as much as we know ourselves so that we know how to use our expertise in our network to the best of our ability to support startups.
The motivation to make money shouldn't be the reason for becoming an angel investor. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, your primary reason for investing in a startup should not be to make a financial gain as an angel investor. Even if your ambition is to become a VC investor one day and open your own venture capital fund, what you're really trying to track there is how many of my startups can graduate from seed to Series A. Wow, 60% of my portfolio. How many of those get acquired? Wow, 2 in the last 5 years got acquired. That's your business case to say, I want to raise a fund. Because if I had raised a fund and had more money, imagine what returns you would have made on this portfolio. So you have to remember the motivations really drives the type of path that you go down as an angel investor. Right? If it's primarily to make money, there's a lot lower risk ways to make money, such as property investing, ETFs, running your own business, or just staying in your career, right? And there's so many ways that you can support entrepreneurs, even if you're not investing. You could be a mentor in an accelerator program. You can support entrepreneurs with free office hours. You just put something on LinkedIn, hey, I'll give half an hour calls on this expertise that I have on developing code or technical development, right? So there's so many different ways that you can engage with entrepreneurs and support beyond the capital. And I think it's important for people to remember that.
It sounds like angel investing is definitely part of a bigger picture and a longer journey for you. So if you don't mind sharing, what is the long-term vision like? What role does angel investing play in your life's long-term vision?
So the way I see it is angel investing helps to unlock value in terms of giving entrepreneurs access to capital, especially entrepreneurs that are traditionally not being brought to the table. But in the long term, those entrepreneurs are going to be successful, at least a cohort of them, like some of the ones we have in the room today. And as they succeed, they're going to go on their wealth creation journey. And how can I support them along that journey? And I think as entrepreneurs, sometimes we have to think about the life cycle of a customer and how we grow with that customer as they go through different life cycles. So there's very interesting things that I'm really fascinated around: buying small businesses, building small businesses, work with other entrepreneurs to operate these businesses. And I'd love to explore that as my portfolio grows. I'd love to help some of them when they're exiting and looking to sell their businesses with some of the networking connections that I have. So I can add different value as I grow with these entrepreneurs and my network and expertise grows alongside them. And that's the kind of way that I see this journey. And that's why I try and form long-term relationships with the entrepreneurs that I'm backing. And I always like to say, like, I measure my life in decades and not days. And that's exactly the kind of commitment that I'm making to the entrepreneurs.
I got one final last question for you. What's like one thing that you really gain and you really love about angel investing?
I can be useful. I can be helpful. Like what I care a lot about is founder NPS. Has that founder had a good experience with me? Have I been responsive when they've needed me? Have I just been an ear to listen when they needed that? Have I been helpful? Have I kept my ego and my bias in check when giving them advice to say, here are some options that they can think about, rather than prescribing them what works for me on my journey, which is often the downfall of many experienced entrepreneurs who talk from their experience like it's the gold standard or the answer, rather than to coach and support someone in understanding how to make an informed decision for themselves. And for me, like what I love is that I feel like when entrepreneurs speak to me, I'm like the board that they can't afford, right? Like I'm supporting them in that way. I'm giving them that care because I care. And I think that's what they value with me. I think the hard thing about me is so many entrepreneurs get in contact with me and would love a coffee catch up. But I can't support my family, I can't pay for the house, I can't support my child in schooling if I always did that. So I try and scale myself through meaningful content like this and the events that we put on.